Climate Change Ambassador. Once upon a time, I was also a youth. That was quite some time ago, but I'm very, very pleased and privileged to be joined by four really, really impressive youth leaders here today who we'll hear quite a bit more from in a moment. And they're all variously participating in COP and joining with other youth delegates and learning an awful lot, but I think what we'll hear is a bit more from them about what they're also hoping that others, governments, communities, business and others can do to help them and their aspirations on climate change. So I should also acknowledge that, of course, today is Youth Day, which is why we're hosting today's event. So look, I'll just make some brief introductions at the beginning, a little bit about what the Australian government's doing to bring more youth voices into what we do to set policy, including on climate change. But I'll just start with some of the sort of bigger picture context pieces, which you'll appreciate. Of course, we're all here at COP29 with a shared purpose, which is not only to confront one of the greatest challenges of the current generation, but to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't get worse for future generations. Of course, climate change is a global challenge, but it really is an intergenerational challenge as well. While young people stand to lose the most from the impacts of climate change if the world doesn't take stronger action, youth are, of course, also the most powerful agents of change globally. Young people are not only inheritors of our climate legacy, but they're the innovators, activists and leaders who are shaping the solutions that we need today, and certainly the solutions we'll continue to need tomorrow. And that's why intergenerational dialogue is so important, so that it ensures that the voices and perspectives of current young people and future generations are captured in the actions we put into place today. And that's really particularly important at a global event like this, here in the UNFCCC process. And so from Australia's perspective, we're very strong supporters of the decision 2 years ago to institutionalise a presidential youth champion for all future COPs. And as a prospective COP host in a couple of years' time, that's something that we're quite excited about taking forward. But it's also equally important at a national level to hear youth voices and perspectives as governments increasingly engage youth in their strategy and policy development. Because incorporating youth voices in climate policy, of course, requires more than just a seat at the table. It requires genuine and authentic engagement and support that values young people as equal partners. On the flip side, of course, tokenistic approaches can undermine trust and risk sidelining the innovative solutions and passion that young people bring to this challenge. Australia's very committed to promoting youth voices, both within our own decision-making processes, but at global events such as this. And in fact, we recently released a new strategy called Engage, ! Which is a strategy to include young people in the decisions we make at a national level in Australia. That strategy recognises the diverse experiences of young people and values the traditional knowledge and cultures of First Nations young people in particular, noting their very strong connection to country. In addition, the Australian Government has also committed to centre the diversity of youth voices into international climate change policy through the development of our first ever Youth Advisory Council. And our intention for that council is that it provides a platform for the voices of young Australians to be heard loud and clear, both in our national conversations and policy development, but as I indicated before, on the global stage at forums like we're all attending here. So that Youth Advisory Council will serve as a formal mechanism to engage young Australians in the development of Australia's international climate policy and engagements. It will ensure that the insights, ideas and expertise of young Australians are integrated into how we participate and how we present and show up at meetings such as these. That council is launching soon. And we'd like to extend, if there are any of these representatives in the audience, our sincere appreciation and thanks to a range of different international and domestic stakeholders that have helped us shape that council. So in particular, our Canadian counterparts at the Environment and Climate Change Ministries of Canada, at colleagues back in Australia, in Canberra, at what is known as our Office for Youth. And of course, the Australian youth leaders and youth organisations, many of which are represented here in the room today. So of note, I'll turn to our panel and we'll start to hear from them. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you 4 young, inspiring leaders from across Australia and the Pacific. So perhaps if I start with Cooper on my right. Cooper Matangira is from Plan International Australia. Welcome, Cooper. And then we have Base Redfern, who is the Pacific Youth Climate Champion for 2024. Third along the row, we have Jamaica Mene from Our Islands, Our Home Youth Alliance, and you're the ambassador, who brings her own support crew right in the front row here. And finally, we have Thomas Webb from Climate Change and Natural Capital. All right, to kick off, beyond those very brief introductions of their names and how they came to be on the panel, I'm going to turn to each one of them to give a little bit more insight about themselves and their background and the work that they do in their specific roles as youth leaders. Let's start with you, Cooper.
Hi everyone, my name is Kupa. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And I am here today and at COP29 with Plan International Australia. And so our role here is to really elevate the voices of young people, but in particular girls from the Pacific, and bring their thoughts, opinions, solutions, and also demands to the global stage.
Thank you, Cooper. Let's move to Base.
Thank you again for the introduction. So my name is Debase, and I think my role here too is to show how important the youth voices in climate policy developments, and especially in the Best Week, we are the front line of climate change impacts. And I want to show the importance of youth voices in the stake of that. For instance, we are the future leaders of today, tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Base. Over to you, Jamaica.
Apologies, guys. I'm just a bit under the weather this morning. Kapu migi batangan itamun kamura, nguzanel Jamaica Mene. I am from the neo-western islands of the Torres Strait, Mobiag Island. I am here together with AFIS and Our Islands, Our Home. I am a proud mother of one and an island ambassador. And I am here so you guys can hear our stories, as I am a storyteller from the Torres Strait Islands. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamaica. And lastly, Thomas.
Hi everyone, so my name's Tom Webb. I work as a lawyer in the climate change, biodiversity, energy space at a firm called Gilbert & Tobin in Australia. I'm here through Gilbert & Tobin, and what we're focused on is really making sure that we're across all the major international climate change, biodiversity issues, making sure we can obviously help not only the clients that we work with, but also the communities as well, and inspiring, I guess, positive action through the work that we do. So really happy to be here and also with these amazing people on this panel.
Thanks, Tom. Now, folks in the audience, I've got a few questions I'll kick off with, but I am quite keen to allow opportunities for those of you in the audience to ask questions directly to any of the individual panellists or as a group. So please, if you do have some questions, or if you don't at this point, think about what you'd like to know from them, and we'll give you that opportunity shortly. But I might just ask collectively to the group, and happy for any or all of you to respond to this, but we'd like to just hear a bit more about some of the specific projects or initiatives that you've been involved in your role as youth advocates, whether in Australia or the Pacific. And in addition to a bit of an explanation about those initiatives, what are you learning from it? What are some of the challenges or the successes from the work that you're doing?
Hi, I'll go. As an island ambassador for Our Islands, Our Home, I am one of the many Torres Strait Islanders on the front lines of climate change. This is my first time engaging in a climate change space internationally, And Our Islands, Our Home is a Torres Strait-led movement that is birthed from the Torres Strait 8 win against the Australian government for their failure to protect our islands in the Torres Strait. One of the projects I have been involved in is the Island Power Program that brings together other island ambassadors from around the Torres Strait to empower and upskill, amplify other island ambassadors around the Torres Strait so our stories can be heard in these spaces and beyond. The lessons people can get or gain from this is motivation, as this is the first Torres Strait Islander lead movement and that is represented by our people on the front line. And it is also based on our country, where we have more engagement from other islanders across the region and also better community involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamaica. Excellent. Other colleagues?
Oh, yes. So I've been involved in a few climate change movements with other young people, and I've learned a lot. So last year, following COP28, a few youth organizations and young people came together to form a coalition to look at how we can support the implementation of DQ's youth strategy and think critically about how we want young people in Australia to engage with climate change and how we can foster young people playing a meaningful role in Australia's domestic policy and international climate policy. And so one of the successes of that was that those recommendations were taken up with full effect. And so now there are two new youth advisory councils, one on Australia's domestic climate policy and one on Australia's international climate policy, giving 20 young people each cycle the opportunity to engage with climate action and climate policy in a way that... And following this, I thought, wow, what an amazing initiative. And so I've been working with a group of young people to replicate this process in New South Wales for the Net Zero Energy Commission. And through that, I've really learned that young people are passionate about their communities. They want to have a say in policy and policy decision making. It's about creating the avenues to ensure that this can occur. And through my work in emergency management, following the Lismore floods and also the 2020 Black Summer bushfires, I saw it again that young people had a lot to say. They wanted to have a say in the rebuilding of their communities, but felt like there weren't enough avenues for them to do so. So I guess one of the key learnings from this is that young people have a voice and they want to be treated as stakeholders and they want to have a chance to be able to contribute to discussions on their communities, both now and also looking forward to the future. But we need to start treating young people as the stakeholders that they are and allowing them to take up space and doing so through creating the avenues for that to occur.
Thank you, Cooper. What about you, Base?
So I wanted to share, so back home in Kiribati, I'm one of the adaptation officer, and I was fortunate to join one of the projects, the integrated vulnerability assessment in the outer islands. And this assessment, or this IVA, has made me like realize and more passionate to learn more on climate change at the community level. And through this assessment, I also found that climate change impacts affect people like diverse groups differently. And so I think this assessment was successful, and I recommend like when we do consultation at the community level, we have to use like simple, more understanding languages at their level, like the community level, so they can understand what we are doing. Like it's not only for us, but all of us. Like climate change impacts affect all of us. So the main purpose of this assessment is like assess the island vulnerability. And we told them that this assessment as well is like to inform, like when we want to develop like concept notes, we use the IVAs as our basic like data. Thank you.
Thank you, Base. Tom, did you want to round out the answers?
Yep. Thank you very much. So, I guess as a lawyer, you sort of sit in the middle of a lot of different stakeholders and partnership models. A lot of the time, you're not specifically leading climate action, but you have a very key role, I guess, enabling and facilitating that to actually occur. So some of the key initiatives I've been involved with is the development of a range of different, climate and biodiversity projects, particularly across Australia, and then also to some extent across the Asia Pacific too. And a lot of those projects, they involve partnerships between business stakeholders, investors, government, NGOs, and communities as well. And I think for me, that's probably the greatest lesson that I can take from these initiatives is that climate change is such an existential issue that affects everybody, but it also means that everyone needs to work together to solve those issues too. So, yeah, I think for my part, and what I try and do with my work, and I guess every day, is to try and be very conscious of not only the climate issues, but also the individual circumstances that communities across Australia, across the Pacific, across the world are facing as well, because I think that's the best way to make the world a better place.
Thanks very much, Tom. I might ask a new question now, which is noting we've got Pacific and Australian representatives. What sort of collaboration and connections are already in place between Australian and Pacific climate youth advocates and leaders? And what barriers are there to taking that even further that governments or others should be thinking about to make that a much stronger connection?
Yeah, I'll go. Firstly, as islanders, we engage and connect more in person. This is for us islanders in the Torres Strait and in the Pacific. This has always been the ways of our people, that we connect face to face rather than on a Teams or a Zoom meeting. The barriers of connecting with our other youth leaders from First Nations, Australia and Pacific would also be hard, as we are often left out, we in the Torres Strait Islands. And we are always a minority. Even though we are First Nation people and are dealing with the effects of climate change. Also, we are all majority from remote areas that have high impacts of weather highly affects us traveling out of our islands. For example, our island in the Torres Strait, Mobiag Island, has one of the shortest runways in the Torres Strait or the Northern Hemisphere. And due to climate change, we've had days where we haven't had any winds that affected planes landing or taking off from our islands. And then, we were forced to travel by boat to attend some summits and stuff. And because of the unpredictable weather patterns, that leads to rough seas. And so that are some of the barriers. And to collaborate more, we as island ambassadors have also already been sharing space with youth Pacific Islanders, sharing our knowledge and stories, but we need more opportunities for cultural exchanges as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamaica. And you're making me think, and I've been guilty often of complaining about the distance that from Australia we have to go to these often Northern Hemisphere, European-based climate meetings. And then you add on to that coming from an island, which often involves, one or two or three connections a week to get from your home to then the next main port to then be able to catch a flight, maybe to Australia, to then start the journey that I'm complaining about. So, and as you indicated before, Jamaica, you're a mother, and that's all this extra time away from home. So it is pretty significant. That, of course, is a plug for why it's so important that we have COP31 in our part of the world in 2 years' time. bring everyone to us for a change. All right, have we got any other answers, perspectives on that question around what's already happening, but what more would help stronger connections between Pacific and Australian youth climate leaders?
I guess for me as an Australian, I think when it comes to meaningfully engaging with the Pacific, I think the most important thing is to engage in really meaningful listening and also engaging with the Pacific on their terms. Hello? Oh, yes. So, as Plan International, one of the things that we've been working on throughout this year, but also throughout the last 4 years, is our report called Pacific Girls in a Changing Climate. And one of the things that we heard, so this report spoke to 350 girls across 6 different island states in the Pacific. And what we heard was that in as much as girls in the Pacific are at the front lines of the climate crisis, they're also at the forefront of leading solutions. They are the solution bearers to this climate crisis that we face. They are activists. They've got the solutions. So what we need to do is not only meaningfully listen to them, but we also need to create space for them to represent themselves in spaces like this at COP29 and at the negotiation table, shaping the text on the basis of their own lived experience. 2 days ago, we had a panel, and Caroline from Fiji spoke so powerfully, and she said that we can't keep using case studies from the Pacific. We can't keep taking stories. We need to give people from the Pacific the opportunity to come and speak for themselves and to represent themselves in stages like this. And I think a barrier to that is funding. And for us to have meaningful, not only intergenerational but intercultural exchange, we really need to prioritize the voice of lived experience.
Thank you, Cooper. Any other perspectives? Tom?
Yeah, I think the main barrier relates primarily to opportunity. I think the fact that most of us are on the other side of the world right now, but have not met each other before, and for many of us, this is our first COP as well. You sort of struggle to identify the right people to speak to or how to build those connections, and I think that's, while there's been a range of events that have happened at the Australia Pavilion, the Moana Pacific Pavilion as well, that have actually sought to promote that engagement, I think there's also work to do on that side back home as well, and to actually be able to open up those channels of engagement, build like stronger youth forums locally, regionally, domestically as well, rather than, I suppose, being on the other side of the world and then getting the opportunity to meet.
Thanks, Tom. Any other views, Base?
I think my brothers and sisters here covered all, but I would just want to share one. As we are youth, we are educated, we are strong-willed, but we still need capacity building, mentorship. For example, my example gonna base back home. So, for example, when we do consultations at a community level, we often feel nervous, anxious, because we know that as young people, our role in our cultural, traditional ways, is to listen, respect, but we need approaches when we do consultation or sharing information to the community level for different diverse group. We need an approach that we can use confidently to share information without any disrespect or any ways that may offend them in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really good point to make. I think how different youth engage with their elders will be different in each community or nation or context. So being aware that there's not a one-size-fits-all way of how you project and engage, I think is a really good point. I'm going to ask one more question before we turn to the audience, and apologies to the panel because it's not one we talked about before. It's more just something that's popped into my head. We've all been, and certainly I've been, talking about youth as a homogenous group and assuming that if you're youth, you're going to expect more from your leaders on climate change. And I think for a strong majority of youth that is the case. But do you see a role and an opportunity for yourselves to also build more education, advice and momentum in parts of the youth in your parts of the world, nations, communities that may not be as activist on climate issues, or in fact may even be a little disillusioned with climate change?
I'll have a go. I think one of the best cures for disillusionment is for young people to actually be given the opportunity to speak to solutions and to be given space to share their thoughts and opinions meaningfully. So, yes, there is a space for education, but I'm actually going to, I guess, take this question in a different way, which is, I guess, how can the government meaningfully engage with young people, noting that young people aren't just a homogenous block? We have a range of intersectional identities, a kaleidoscope of lived experience, and intersectional nuances. And I think that one of the things that government needs to do is to really start engaging. In as much as there's anxiety and there's disillusionment, there are solutions. I think that those solutions heard. Thank you. And I feel like those solutions aren't being heard because not enough young people have the opportunity to have a say. I love youth advisory councils, I really do, but one of my fears with them is that they only give a handful of young people who are willing to put their hand up and to be on a youth advisory council the opportunity for their voice to carry weight. And I think that as governments to really understand what young people are thinking, young people from metro areas, from rural, from regional, from remote areas, and young people from across the world, government really needs to start engaging. It needs to go where young people are at and understand what their needs are. And in as much as we do have this fantastic new youth engagement strategy, engage with the exclamation mark, the work is there, the learnings are there, the insights are there. What now needs to happen is implementation. For all those recommendations that young people put their heart and soul into building, for them to come to a reality. There's a lot of knowledge amongst young people. We need to start listening and we need to start engaging so that we can really tap into that reservoir.
Thank you, Cooper. Any other responses to that question, Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Cooper. I think those are really, really important words, what you were just saying there. Something that springs to my mind is about having like adequate representation of youth people within actual primary decision-making forums. So having advisory councils, great, but you also need, I think, youth voices within the actual decision-making process. Like, for example, I've been a part of the board of the National Environmental Law Association for about 2.5 years, but one of the things that organisation does really well is it is enshrined minimum requirements for youth and for junior professionals to actually be involved on the board and make those decisions. And I think that's something that I want to take forward in terms of my life and my work, is that it's so refreshing to have young people in the room because they are able to think creatively, they're able to think outside the box and offer something new into these actual decision-making processes. I think that's a really, really important next step from engagement, from implementation, is then how do you actually have appropriate representation within decision-making forums.
Can I ask a follow-up, Tom? You can save your applause for the two-part response. But having experienced that yourself, so as a young professional being on a board of what I presume is older, more experienced professionals for the National Environmental Law Association, does that help you, or does that mean you've learnt what the motivations and the persuasive arguments are for a group, and does that actually mean that as a young person you're sort of calibrating how you engage or what you put forward because you're learning about what gets a positive response?
Yeah, I think that's right, because ultimately having the opportunity to be a part of that forum is not only, I guess, important for the organisation to be recognising other voices, it's also amazing for for a junior person to be able to have the opportunities to learn from all of these other brilliant people. And I think that's something that I've been reflecting on a little bit. With a lot of the youth events we've had, it's been youth representatives, which is obviously amazing to everyone, but it'd also be good to have more senior representatives around as well during that process. So then we can meet and have mentoring and opportunities and relationships with those senior members of, say, the government or even civil society, businesses as well, because yeah, I think it's twofold. It's not just about how to then communicate the message, it's also like your own personal development and growth and level of comfort that you have within yourself to communicate that message.
Can I just jump in on that, if that's okay? I agree with you. And I also think that there's something to be had in government, civil society, meeting young people where they're at and engaging with young people in a wide variety of ways. For me personally, I came to the world of COP and multilateral climate engagement through a poem. It was through art. So it wasn't through engaging, in, say, policy or in a board. It was through those creative means, because for me, climate change is such a big issue and I had a lot of strong feelings, but I didn't know how to articulate them in prose per se, but I could do it in poetry. And I think when it comes to meaningful youth engagement, we have to really broaden what we mean by youth engagement and think about how can we best serve young people and their needs, but make sure that young people don't need to come to us. They don't need to come to government. We come to young people and we do so in a way that is acceptable to them. So let's do it through art, let's do it through boards, let's do it through engagement, through storytelling, through policy, through a whole range of means so that we can get more young people on board and more stories heard.
Thank you, Cooper. Jamaica or Bays, any responses?
I think they answered the question. Thank you.
Problem, thank you. We might open up for any questions from the audience. See one hand here, one here. Excellent. We've got lots of questions from this side. I'll go to you first. And if you just introduce yourself.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Nishad from UNICEF. Thank you all for an incredibly important panel, and it's great that we're seeing more of this kind of stuff at the Australian Pavilion. My question is, it relates to, so we've heard lots of, I guess, words thrown around that describe the relationship between youth and decision makers. So heard, listened to, seat at the table. My question is, what more, if anything, would be required for young people to feel like governments are actually accountable to them? And are there processes or mechanisms within our kind of policy-making architecture that could enable that? So accountability.
Cooper.
I can have a go. My paper keeps running away from me. I can have a go. I love your question, and I think it's something that's really important. I think there are a few things that can happen, that should happen, and I'll keep them at two. One is a broader cultural shift. I think young people are still viewed as like entities that can be spoken for or spoken on behalf of. Young people are not passive receivers of policies around them. They are agentic beings that should have the opportunity to shape policies, to shape the world that they want to see. And for that to occur, I think we need like a shift in our mindset towards how we think of young people. And we need to start thinking of young people, particularly in the policy architecture, as stakeholders in all policy that impacts them. So, for example, when Australia is doing industrial relations policy and has employers at the table, it has employees, it has peak bodies. When it comes to young people, they need to have a say in all policy that impacts them, and they need to do it from a position of power and leverage, and that leverage comes from being a stakeholder. And I feel like that's still a cultural shift that Australia needs to undertake. And I think the second part to that is within our broader framework and policy architecture, young people, in my opinion, and their work still isn't valued enough. I think we always say we want to hear from young people, but we don't fund them. We don't fund their solutions and we don't fund their ideas. And I think in order to have meaningful engagement, really, government needs to not only value our voices, but to be able to fund our work so that it can keep on going. And so that once again, we can come to that table being a stakeholder and not just, a tick box, to engage with. So we need funding.
Thanks, Cooper. Any other responses?
Yes, I can add on that. As a young girl coming from a cultural background, we are often, youth are not heard, like Sissy here base said. Our elders require us to listen to them when they should be listening to us, because our future, it is our future that we are walking into and stuff. So I always believe that youth voices are extremely important because it's our future at stake, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Jamaica. Thanks, Tom.
I'll just add something quickly, and it's going to go back to my point that I made earlier around involvement in primary decision-making forums. I think that is such a key fundamental thing. You see a lot in the legislative and regulatory policy architecture that there's certain committees that are established to advise the government on particular issues, like I think the Nature Repair Market Committee is one, the New South Wales new Net Zero Commission as well is another thing, and they enshrine and they list out in the legislation what level of experience or from what, I guess, walk of life, what expertise that commission or that committee needs to be formed out of. There's never anything to do with youth representation there. And if you look at the committees that the two I just mentioned, the Net Zero Commission, the Nature Repair Market Committee, which are dealing with environmental and climate change issues from a very, very high-level policy perspective. None of those committees, which were established in the last year, actually include anyone of youth or junior representation. So I think it's something to think about.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jamaica. Base, no? We'll go to the next question.
Thank you for your question. I think they answered all your question, but I just want to share. In Kiribati, we have the Kiribati National Youth Council, and also we also, have the first youth-led group called the TYA, or the Tungaro Youth Action. And as part of my job back home, we coordinate like climate change related projects, and we have this advisory body like for Kiribati governments. We call it the KNEC, the Kiribati National Expert Group. And when we do like a workshop on the new projects, we always invite the youth rep to come and join the discussion of the project. But as my sister here like mentioned, it's just made of a tick box, like ticking the box. But I think they all covered it, and I just want to share that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tish, I'm coming for you for your question.
Thank you so much, and thank you, young leaders. It's so incredible to have you all up there with your different expertise and lens, and really, share your knowledge and passion with us all here today. Hi, I'm Tish, and I'm a Torres Strait Islander advocate, and I think just really hearing. Jamaica, you kind of answered my question already, but I wanted to explore that because, like Tom, you've mentioned like these incredible sort of, I guess, high-level sort of, groups that are sort of shifting policy up there. But, Jamaica, you really mentioned something that before we get to sort of that seat at the table within these sort of colonial structures, there are cultural obligations within communities. And so you mentioned that it's so important, like naturally we listen to our elders, but it does, because of sometimes cultural hierarchy, there are young voices missing, or some of those voices missing. And so I'd love to, maybe this is directed at Jamaica and you base, like maybe there is, what have been, why is it important to have that representation first within your community before we sort of come to these like international platforms? And maybe if there's something, if you could maybe share a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Tish. Sorry. I had some- think it's better to have good representation from our islander communities, from a youth perspective. Just like I said before, our words and thing have a better impact, I think, on a international space or in panels and stuff because sorry yeah, as a youth representative, being in the shadows of elders and stuff like that, I joined the Island Power program with Our Islands Our Home as an island ambassador because I shared with our lead sorry
Why don't
Sally.
why don't I ask,
Sorry.
if I ask the question this way, hopefully not changing, Tish, what you were getting at. What I heard from Tish was, before you even get to a forum like this, to be able to come and speak with permission and authority of your community, you often have to have done quite a lot of work, including to get the permission through your hierarchy, your elders, to do that. So what would you suggest? I mean, the obvious thing I think about is that takes much more time. So governments often say, right, we want something done by here, so you've got 2 weeks, go. And then we expect you to sort of fall in line with our timeframes. I'm guessing that's hard. Are there things like that, or because of what you have to do in community to sort of get a lot of work done to get permission to turn up here and speak on behalf of your community or even your youth? What would be your advice to governments that we just need to better understand or do certain things differently to help that process for you?
Yeah, sorry. As I was getting to that, I just wanted to share this thing I have. During the king tide seasons of our islands, our parents used to walk calmly to our store to get shopping done. My days now, I have to rush to the shop in 10 minutes. Otherwise, one of our main roads on our islands will get submerged under water. So I find that it will be much easier for us to talk on behalf of our elders and stuff because we have been impacted more in this generation than our past generations, and it's hard to get out of the hierarchy and to get past our elders to say something, but it's our new generation, and I think we need to go forward and let our youth speak. Thank you.
Base?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, I would like to say I love my culture, like listening to my elders, respecting them. I love it. It's just that like my sister here, like said, we are here for the future, and like back home when I do my job, like sharing information on climate change impacts, making sure they understand in a right approach. And even though the like our elders, like they've been here before us and they've been resilient before us. Like for example, they have this traditional knowledge that we can use to help minimize the impact of climate change. Like they know how to plant food crops. They do like food conservation. Like they have these skills. So yeah, so I think from my side, it is also important to listen to those that come before us so that we can fill the gap and continue their legacy, like in our terms, fighting for climate justice. They've already done the work. If they show us the way, we'll follow and maintain or continue their legacy in climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Base. All right, I think Jared, you were next. Mike's getting a bit.
Thank you, Kristen. And just a question, kind of building off one of Kristen's questions earlier about the roles, the different roles that young people play in this process. So keen to hear your thoughts on youth in government and in public service. So I can recall many of my young colleagues in graduate programs not spending a lot of time in the department or indeed leaving after a few years. And indeed many conversations with young Australians and others about, come join us in the public service or in government, and there'd been a bit of a hesitation there. Why do you think there's that hesitation for young people? Is there a disillusionment with kind of institutions and structures? And how do we kind of, attract more people into kind of these decision-making spaces? Because I think we often forget there are some fantastic young people working in government and working in public service at all levels. How do we make that kind of a career path viable, I suppose, for more future generations? Thank you.
And has Jared tempted any of you to come and join the Australian Public Service?
That's a great question, Jared, and one that I'm happy to answer, I guess, from my own lived experience. I finished uni and I started at the Australian Public Service. I was very eager and I was bright-eyed, and I speak in past tense because I've since left the public service because I was a little bit disillusioned. And I guess when I went into the public service, I had this grand idea and this ambition of creating change, and I'd been, to COPs and I'd been involved in multilateral processes, and I thought that as an individual, I can do something. And it's true, individuals can and are leading the push for climate action and for action in so many other spaces. But I guess the thing when it comes to young people, when they enter these roles, in the public service, there's this tendency to respect people based on what level they're at. So it's commonplace to listen to a deputy secretary or a secretary when they're speaking, or indeed an ambassador or someone very senior. But when you start, as a graduate, no matter how much knowledge you have, no matter how much lived experience you have, because of your position, you're not really seen as someone who's able to hold weight. And most of the time, you're not even allowed on the tables or in, the steering committees or any of the forums that are really creating change. So a lot of the time, I found that I was shut out from the spaces that I really wanted to be in. And I ended up doing, a lot of tasks that I kind of didn't want to be doing. I wanted to have a say, but I just couldn't because I wasn't seen as being senior enough. And the only time I was allowed to speak meaningfully, let's say on a steering committee, was when, I guess, someone allowed me to do so, and they had to break protocol to enable me, someone very junior, to be able to be on the steering committee in New South Wales government at this point in time for the Youth Justice Action Plan. So I think to really make the public service something that young people can see as being an attractive prospect and something that they're not disillusioned by is, once again, for young people to be given weight, really, and for us to stop looking at people outside of the titles that they carry and start looking at people from the basis of their lived experience and what they have to say, because every opinion matters, whether it comes from the top or anywhere in between.
Anyone want to follow Cooper's lived experience and excellent perspectives? All right, we might open up for a final question if there is one from the audience. Got one up the back here. Hang on.
Thank you, panelists, for your insights. Really appreciate you taking the time out of the day to speak to us all. I just have a question. I think some of the panelists did mention it briefly, just the issue of youth opportunity and ensuring that it's not just the most, I guess you could say, extroverted or the most passionate people are raising their hands to get in those positions, those limited positions where their insight can be listened to in public forums, but also just those other people that, might have some very good contributions to make, but are just not comfortable raising their hand. I'm just wondering, for solutions to that kind of problem, what are your sort of specific insights to that? Thanks.
Thank you. Who's got some views?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think the one of the ways that I would look to solve this is through co-designing a lot of processes with youth people, so they can actually it's more approachable and accessible for young people from across different walks of life as well. I think it's a really good point you make, and something that I've been, I guess, thinking about over the last week or so is that the people here are all, like the youth people here are all brilliant people, but there's a lot of people back home that aren't here as well, and it's how do we actually make sure we can engage with them properly and promote their views, and I think provide access to them, and I hope that can be led a lot of the time by other young people as well. I think you just then need to be conscious of sometimes the burden that might place on those people, feeling like they have to champion their views to promote that across the society. And I think that co-design process could be a good solution because it just makes it more accessible and easy for everyone to access and understand. And I think there's a lot of work to be done going into schools across Australia, across the Pacific, of educating people on what does climate change mean, how can you get involved, and also, I guess, dispelling some of the myths and just making people feel comfortable to talk about their fears, their anxiety, or if they don't care, then they don't care, and that's okay.
Absolutely. I think co-designing is something that is immensely important and something that needs to happen more often. And I think that the real keys to climate action are through consultation and collaboration. And to just add on to your point, I'm going to start by caveating that I really do like youth advisory councils. I think they're a great means for youth engagement, but I think they're just but one. I think that there's a specific type of person who is willing to put their hand up for a youth advisory council. And most of the time they've had the privilege of leadership in the community or the privilege of volunteering, which is something that is not accessible to most young people, largely because it's unpaid. And I think that what now needs to happen to ensure that more youth voices are consulted is for governments and decision makers to go to young people, to go to communities, and to meet young people where they're at, and to do so in a variety of mediums. Policy is one way that we can engage young people, but we can engage in a whole bunch of different ways, through storytelling, through meaningful engagement, through arts, like the Australian Youth for International Climate Engagement does. So I think the onus is also on government to go to young people and to branch out and reach young people in rural communities, remote communities, and communities that really aren't part of the decision-making process, so that their voices can also be included. And I think the second part to that is, I think we have a very one-dimensional approach to what youth engagement is, and that approach often involves young people coming into these spaces. But really, we need to go in to the spaces where young people are at, to youth groups, to schools, to clubs, and start engaging with young people in a way that they want to be engaged with.
Thank you, Cooper. Excellent point. I'll just see if any of our remaining panellists have anything to add. We might We might wrap up there. I've got 3 thank yous, including the final one for the panellists. But can I thank all of the audience for making this interactive and asking your questions and taking back some things that you yourselves might do differently, or which could include what you expect, demand, or put to government to do differently as well. Can I thank, and Elise will correct me if I get anyone wrong, but certainly Elise and Alex, and I'm sure many others in your wonderful team who have done such an excellent job to, and I won't say solve, but make real progress in the Australian government doing a better job listening and having meaningful participation of youth in the work that we do. So thank you. Is it you as well, Jared? Thank you, Jared, for all your hard work. And finally, of course, the wonderful panellists, so Cooper, Base, Jamaica and Tom, for being part of this and the work that you do every day. Thank you.